Life's a funny thing. Some of us are dealt some pretty cruddy cards, and then we're expected to just grow up. Normal. That leaves a lot of us to struggle as we navigate through life's difficult times. And if you're anything like me, you have no idea what the hell normal is. Welcome to the Wishbone Podcast with me, your host, Luke Ohana, as we discuss and share our life stories in hopes of helping each other out. So if you got 30 minutes, let's talk about it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Wishbone Podcast. My name is Luca, and I'll be your host. And we're at episode 4, and this is it's been a very, very fun experience for me. The support I've had from my friends and family has been really amazing. I just can't say enough. I am finding that it is cathartic already because I'm starting to showcase, some of the wounds and whatnot that I've always kind of kept tightly bound and protected. And there is something to say about kind of pouring out my cup in this fashion that is daunting and yet hopefully inspiring and helpful to anyone who is listening. It is tough in the sense that it's a lot tougher in the sense that I have a hard time just talking to a mic with no one in the room and finding that inspiration to keep talking about myself. It seems very taboo, but with that being said, it is offering me the opportunity to do so, which is, I guess, needed. All right, so let's start off with last week's question of, does God exist? And I think for those who know me would know that I'm an atheist. I'm also a secular humanist, and while those two aren't mutually inclusive, it definitely is important for me to state that. I don't think that the evidence we currently have is sufficient enough for me to warrant the belief in a God. And while I can't prove that no God exists, I definitely can't convince myself that there is a God. And that took me quite a while to kind of break free the shackles of religion. And I think that's what it is. I mean, religion, in my opinion, convinces you that you're sick and convinces you that their homeopathic remedy toward that sickness is their cure. Now, that thought system was given by Matt Dillahunty, but it's very succinct. You are taught you are sick, you are sinful the second you're born, and the only cure is what they're selling. But that is not how I came to be an atheist. It started out with me being in world history and learning about the many denominations of Christianity, actually any religion really. And it's all based on the opinions of a group of men who decided that God's word was not being deciphered correctly, and so they went off on their own. Whether the Pope has the final say or direct channel communication to a God, whether you do, it quickly diversified. And if there's only one God, how does that make sense? So that started the question for me is, if this is the true word of God, how are we deciphering it so many different ways and interpreting the way we do? A second big, event in my life was I lost a dear friend of mine, and the answer I was given to excuse her death was it was her time to go, and God has plans for me and not her, and that was despicable to me at the time. And again, it caused me to start thinking. And if God is omniscient, and if he's omnipotent, so if he knows everything in the past, present, and future, if he's all-knowing, all-powerful, then he created my sister to be transgender only to punish her. That makes no sense to me. Now, I get a lot of flack for feeling this way or seeing it this way. A lot of my Christian friends will say, well, it's a lifestyle that she's choosing to have. It's a choice. And you have every right to feel that way, but it doesn't make any sense to me. I had a dear friend of mine, a roommate, who told me some stories and about behavior aversion therapy. And one of them, I can remember is a person was hooked up to electrodes and was asked to go and buy pornographic material, something that person had never done before. So had no idea what he was looking for and what to look for, what what interested him. So he never looked at pornography. So he did, and they made slides out of these images, and then they electrocuted him. They tortured him. And at one point, he's begging them to stop and screaming and apologizing to his mom and promising the world that he would stop and change. Is this a choice? I'm asking you guys, is that something that you would do for a choice? To endure that? Most of us would not do that for a choice. So, I implore you to have some empathy, really think about what the hell you're saying. We're born the way we're born, and there's a lot of science to back that up, and we can get into that. Again, this is my opinion, and you have every right to your opinion, and I'd love to discuss our contrasting opinions. We as a country do not debate and discuss our opinions nearly as much as you think we do. We just argue, and arguing is not productive. Discussions are productive, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Our country was based on the fact that we left persecution in the hopes of a freedom to believe in what we want, and free of persecution, and for the pursuit of happiness. And so I think we are getting away from that. I do believe that a separation of church and state is needed for this dream set 200 something years ago to come to fruition, to come true. I do believe that American patriotism is, I will fight tooth and nail to defend your opinion, whether it's aligns with mine or not. You have every right to your opinion, and you have every right to express your opinion. That is the American dream. The late, great John McCain, a Republican that I didn't agree with his policies, but I definitely agreed with his patriotism. The man was the real deal, and we need more politicians like that. So to sum up what I'm trying to say, I have no judgment for you if you believe in whatever you believe. And it's not that I expect that you don't have any judgment toward me, but really what I would love for anybody to do, and maybe this is a helpful reminder, is to go open-minded. Remember that this is a discussion and not an argument. As soon as someone tells you that you will not convince me, then you should stop trying, and it should just be a discussion. If someone asks you, try to convince me, it's a different story. But again, it's a discussion. If we can keep that in mind, that would be something that would be super helpful. It's pretty pathetic to see a lot of these people just shouting out at one another and shouting out at a camera. I think it's ridiculous. We're adults. Let's talk like adults. That's my little rant for America, and we'll move on. So I want to talk about how and where I grew up. So I grew up, I would say, middle lower class. I grew up in affordable housing, and I did move around quite a bit. I was in between homes quite a bit, so I never really felt at home. I never really had a bed for too long before I had to move and sleep on a couch or on the floor. But it didn't seem like it was, a weird, out of place thing for me. We definitely had to kind of fight for our food and for our nightly place to stay. I would never know that, though, because it seems like the neighborhood we grew up in, we were all kind of at the same level. Everybody kind of grew up poor and on the streets. And one thing that was constant in my life is nature. So whether I grew up as poor as I did, I always had this kind of front row seat to something that I found extraordinary. We had a leaky outdoor spigot, a little faucet, and it would leak all summer. And the little puddle that it formed would grow. I mean, just amazing life. It was mostly mosquito larvae and red mites, but it was something that I would spend hours watching, just on my belly, like 2 inches away from this puddle, just engrossed in the play that was, unfolding in front of me. I had my little yard spiders that I would feed ants to and make sure every day that they were getting fed. And I had the ant colonies themselves that I would go and find food for. I'd give them candy or caterpillars. I would also rescue caterpillars and bury them. So I was fascinated by nature, and it was something that definitely allowed me an outlet to feel secure. We had a neighborhood dog, like a lot of neighborhoods do. They have these dogs that kind of wander around, but there was a little wire-haired black dachshund named cleverly Blackie, and Blackie was our neighborhood dog, and he would follow all of us around, going house to house, begging for scraps, and I'm sure didn't really have a home. But one day he was limping um, with a group of kids, and so I went over there, and he was just the sweetest dog. And I realized he had a goat's horn, a thorn in his foot, and something that we called stickers. Does anyone else call them stickers? Anyway, he had a sticker in his foot, and I removed it, and something happened because ever since that day, that dog would follow me around. It would sleep in our yard, waiting for me to go get ready for school, walk me to school. He would walk me back from school. He was just an amazing companion, something that I look back on very fondly and really appreciate that relationship that I had with that dog. And I'm sure that dog ended up going in a pretty miserable way, probably by a car, as a lot of neighborhood dogs did back then. But it it was very compelling to me at that time. That relationship was a beautiful thing for me. But we we my sister and I definitely grew up kind of naively, even though we were getting abused and we were starving and hungry pretty much all the time. In fact, one of my nicknames growing up, my mom gave me, which is "Are you done with that?" And I guess I would just ask. I mean, all the time, "Are you done with that?" in hopes that I could pounce on your plate. I mean, if you hesitated for a second, I'm going to ask, "Are you done with that?" Because I'll eat it. I don't know if you have any issues or problems trying to get rid of that food, but I'll take care of it for you. And I did. It kind of came back to bite me in the butt later on because I had friends whose houses I would go to often, and then all of a sudden they would say, "Hey, I'm so sorry, but you can't come over anymore." I'm like, "Why?" And they would say, "Well, my parents can't afford to feed you anymore, man." So it got a little crazy, a little hectic. And that was kind of hard for me to swallow, of course, because where am I going to eat? I'm hungry. But anyway, so my sister and I would, we would dumpster dive, and we would love to dumpster dive McDonald's and Einstein bagels. They were kind of the best places for us to find quite a bit of food. Einstein had the better food, and we got less sick from Einstein bagels, and they had easier to access trash cans. But McDonald's also had some trash cans that were pretty easy. We did get sick, I mean, quite often. But what's weird is we'd eat, get sick, expel that food, and then come back for more. But we were so excited when Monopoly was being played at McDonald's because we were just so sick with the dream that we would win and be able to come back to our dad and be like, "Dad, look what we did for you. Look what we did for us. We won. We could take away your stress," or whatever the case is. Um, and luckily there was like the Madeline Cathedral in downtown Salt Lake City that would give away sack lunches. Um, there's also a hack for you, for those of you who I can't help out personally. Like if you're hungry and I'm near you, you just say the word and I will make sure you are being fed. I just think that is something that should not happen nowadays. However, here's a hack for you. If you go into 7-Eleven, or at least this is what I used to do. I'm not going to say you should do it now, but if you can, it's a great hack. It might tear your stomach up, but they at 7-Eleven have that little hot dog station with the condiments, and those condiments are free for if you buy a hot dog. I'm sure they're a lot more strict on it now, but back then, every day we used to go in there and grab that little, whatever it is, 8-ounce styrofoam cup, fill it with a ton of chili, a ton of nacho cheese, jalapenos, and a ton of onions, and mustard and ketchup, like anything we could to boost up the bulk of this meal, and we would eat that. So yeah, we definitely sustained ourselves in some pretty creative ways. We found any neighborhood tree that was fruiting, we were on it. Um, and a couple times we got kicked out and had to spend the night in some pretty crazy places. One time, it was wintertime, it was during school, but I think it was the weekend. We got kicked out, and so yes, we had jackets and coats on, but we definitely weren't going to make it exposed. So we had to find a place to kind of ride out the night. And they had this big recycle bin that you used for, phone books and different things like that. And if you've ever, the mainland phone book is huge. It's got to be 4 inches thick. Now, that's when phone books existed. I don't know if phone books exist nowadays, but back then they were super thick. And they gave you one every year. And so these recycle bins were huge. They were maybe 4 feet by 6 to 8 feet wide and about 5 feet tall. And the opening to discard your recycle goods was big enough for a human being. So we climbed in there and we had our fun. We were climbing all over the place, jumping, chasing each other, playing tag. And it's wintertime, so it's dark already by the time we crawl inside. And as we start to wind down and go to sleep, now mind you, we'd been there for a few hours, we start to see the massive books start to heave and move, and we hear moaning, and we're like, what the hell? So we kind of butt up against each other, and we're watching this pile kind of heave and move, and we realized very quickly that there had been someone in there this entire time. Now, either a drunk person, a person who was very high, or someone who was shot and dying and bleeding to death. Either way, there was someone there with us, and we we stayed in there with him the entire night. We never saw him, but we did hear him every once in a while moaning and whatnot. And then when morning came, we quickly got the hell out of there because that's what we do. Yeah. So, and of course, there was a lot of experiences like that seem crazy, but at the time, it didn't seem nuts to us. It was just part of our daily life. Even now, I don't find it crazy or weird or unjust. It's just something that we did as part of your everyday life. Another contrast to everyday life is I had my first joint of marijuana and my first drink of beer the very same day. I was maybe second or third grade, and I remember being offered this by my quote unquote gang friends, and I remember it was a Keystone Light, and it was the big can, the extra big can, whatever that is, 16 ounce. And so I took a first sip and I'm, oh, that's piss. That just tastes like cold piss. So I'm not drinking that. But the guy was like, you opened it, you drink it. And you didn't say no to that kind of guy. And so I drank it and I got high. And then I remember another guy came in who was like in his 15, 16, something like that. And I remember he was like humping my head and he was like, oh, what are you, gay? What are you, gay? And I remember thinking, even though I was young, like, you're humping my head, bro. Like, how am I gay in this scenario? But again, it was a normal day-to-day interaction. It just didn't faze me. I'm not sure what the hell that means. But anyway, another running theme growing up was our need to fight. So we were getting in quite a bit of fights. Whether it was the group of us young kids, which we belonged to a gang called Tiny Toons, which was in the clique of La Raza and all that, we would jump older people, and we were, freaking 10 and 11 years old, and we were jumping other kids or other people. We were getting jumped. I had a juvenile record by the time I was like 12 or 13, just from fighting. We would fight all the time. There was a kid that I remember we fought for like 4 hours just straight. We just kept throwing each other around, and he was a scrappy little kid, man. He was like, you ever seen Nacho Libre? He was one of those little lion twins. He was nuts. But what's so funny is after we fought and swore and freaking said all these things to each other and made each other bleed, we went and stole food from a store called Handy Pantry and ate together side by side. So it's such a weird like juxtaposition where you're like fighting each other in one sense and then breaking bread in the next sense. It was a very weird thing to contemplate right now. In fact, I think just times were different. I remember on our way to the Handy Pantry, maybe with that young feller, maybe not, I don't know, but I don't remember. But we saw this accident unfold right in front of us on 400 South, where this little copper-colored Honda Civic was traveling like 100 miles an hour. And I only know that from the subsequent news story, but he's traveling 100 miles an hour, drunk off his ass, slams into this van full of people, 3 kids and 2 adults, 3 infants, like car seat needing infants, and 2 adults. The driver of the van was this very elderly Tongan man, and he was expelled from the car through the windshield, and he landed right in front of us. Let me take a step back real quick. So the Honda hit the van. The van kind of ramped up on top of the Honda, and they both stopped each other. Both vehicles stopped each other, and that kind of caused the driver to be flown through the windshield and land near us, like I said. And we saw his head hit the curb. We saw his skull shift as it hit the curb, and we saw his brains pop out of his ears, at least what we thought were brains. And I'm telling you, we were like third, second grade, maybe, maybe fourth grade. I don't know. And then blood just started pouring out of his head down the gutter, and it ran like water down the gutter. And this is my note of having a different time. The news came and interviewed us without any parental consent. And I remember watching myself on the news later. I don't know if it was that day or what, but I just remember me and my friend were like, "Oh my gosh, it was so crazy. We saw this car driving, hit the gun, blah, blah." It was just crazy. Like, that would never happen nowadays. And of course, the driver was fine. He walked away, hopefully imprisoned, and that family was forever scarred for seeing that. But we were not. At least I'll speak for myself. I was not. That was something that seemed absolutely normal. And that is what is so bizarre to me nowadays, because I can't imagine my boys being able to get into a fight, and not be irreversibly damaged from it. I just don't see how that's possible. Maybe they're a lot more resilient than I think, and maybe I just caught them. But the amount of fights I got to, the amount of close calls I had, the amount of death and blood and gore that I saw, it just is so bizarre to me. That's kind of how we grew up. That is the biggest contrast I can take away from my upbringing. But yeah, so we fought all the time. I mean, we were starting fires all the time. We were stealing all the time. One of the times that I got caught, it really backfired. Now, keep in mind, we were stealing all the time. Maybe every day, maybe weekly, multiple times a week, stealing candles and lighters. But one time, we had hit the Smiths multiple times. I can't believe it took them this long to catch on to us. But what we would do is we would go in there, steal, and then leave. I'm not going to really get into the details. But one time, we were going to go down this aisle, and I was like, no, we got to go down the next aisle for whatever reason. So we go down the next aisle, and that aisle is the only aisle that had an employee in it. And oh my gosh, that person was on us. They knew right away what we were doing. So they stop us. They bring us into the office, and they say, "What's your name?" And I'm like, "I'm going to die. If my dad finds out what I did, I'm in so much trouble." So I said, "My name's Ray," which was the name of my brother, my sister. And so I could hear it on those old school phones. I said, "Hey, Mr. Dipple, we have your son here, Ray. He was caught stealing." And I could hear my dad's voice on the other end going, "That's funny. I'm looking at Ray." And I thought, "Oh my God, that's it. I'm dead. I'm gonna die. You might as well arrest me now." Anyway, so yeah, I got a pretty mean licking from that one, but pretty funny to think that I could get away with it. And yeah, that's just how we survived in those times. We stole, we fought. Few times we were arrested, but what was weird back then is when you were caught by the police, at least in my experience, they brought you home, which I didn't want them to, obviously, but they brought us home. And, I remember the handoff where the cops were like, "Are you going to listen to your dad this time? Or are you going to stay out of trouble?" And, "Yes, sir, I will." Okay, there you go. And obviously, your dad's going to give you more of a lesson than we will. It's kind of how what was being translated at the time. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And we all kind of raised each other. Like, some of the local moms and dads and aunties and uncles would scold us. And kind of on that note, I do remember, we had some Polynesian neighbors, and in our neighborhood, the Polynesian neighbors had a bit of a reputation for being heavy-handed, with the one exception, which would have been my house. So I remember my sister had run away, and my dad had spent a couple days looking for her, and he found her. He finally got word of where she was. I'm not sure if we found her and told him or whatever the case is, but he caught her right in front of one of the Polly's houses. And this particular house had a really bad reputation for, like, gang affiliations and fights, and like, the sons were getting beat with 2x4s and whips and whatnot. And so that house just had a certain reputation to it. Like, stay away from that guy's lawn because he'll mess you up. But they were out, and when they saw my dad grab my sister and slam her head off the hood of the car, and then again against the rear fender and throw her in, they looked surprised, and they thought, at least it looked like, dude, that's a little too much. We beat our kids, but back off. Like, take a little lighter touch. So I remember seeing their face and going, God damn, they're thinking it's bad. It's pretty bad. And of course, this translated to home life. So my sisters and brothers and I, we would fight at home, but we had a deadline to meet. We had to fight and then finish cleaning the house before my mom got home. So we would definitely chase each other around the house. And my sister Nicole was notorious for grabbing a knife, so she chased around the house with a knife. If she ever caught us, who knows what would happen. But one particular time, my older sister and I, we have each other, like, we're doing the splits. Like, our feet are mirroring each other. We're kind of in a split position. We both have each other's hair in our hands, and we're both tugging on each other as we're trying to punch each other. And that later led to us both being in a headlock, each other's headlock, punching each other's face, where the younger siblings, Jessica and Nicole, were either fighting or begging us to stop. But then all someone would have to say is, hey, it's almost 5 o'clock. And we would immediately knock that shit off, jump to cleaning the house, cleaning the dishes, sweeping, mopping, vacuuming, clean ourselves up before mom got home so that she wouldn't have to lift anything. And I think that is kind of my synopsis of my upbringing. It was chaotic. It was filled with hate and violence and love. And that is what is my upbringing. That's just kind of how we grew up. And as we moved around and whatnot, we were able to explore nature a lot more. In fact, I'd say for the full year before my sister was removed, we did something very special. And I look back on this time very fondly because it's one of the last times that I got to bond with my sister as tightly as we did. And we'd make this 30-mile trip from the east side all the way to City Creek Canyon. We'd catch the bus. We'd pack a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a gallon of water. And we'd hike along this trail. And we would name, the landmarks that we came across. The beginning of the trail, there's this zigzag that's lined in this stone wall that we'd call the Great Wall of China. And then there's a giant concrete slab that had broken off and fallen across the river that during certain parts of the year would develop this turquoise green cyanobacteria algae, and we would call it Turquoise Falls. And so once a month we'd plan for it. We'd go and we'd hit the Great Wall of China, Turquoise Falls. We'd catch rattlesnakes and lizards. And one time we had a pretty dramatic event where the trail, she slipped off the trail, which kind of followed the cliff edge. And it must have been like a 15-foot fall, but at the time it was like cliffhanger scene, man. It was like I was holding on to her hand and she's screaming and begging, please don't let go of me, brother. Don't let go. And in my head, I'm like, there's no way I'm letting my sister die. So I freaking mustered all the human body strength I could, and I pulled her up, and she lands right beside me, and we're breathing all heavy, dramatic, like we just survived a T-Rex chase. And I just remember loving that moment and thinking I did a good thing today. I was a good older brother. And later that year, she was taken away. So it was definitely a great last hurrah for me, and I'm sure for her before things went silent. And it was incredibly lonely after that, because you have to remember, her and I were attached at the hip at that point. We definitely took our lickings together and had survived a lot together by that time. So that kind of gives you an idea of how and where I grew up. It's a very quick overview of how that happened. But the podcast is young, and I'm sure you'll hear me talk about myself quite a bit more, as awkward and as weird as that is to say. But now we'll jump into matters of the brain. And in this week's Brain Matters question, the question is, should we suffer? I'll let you think about that. Well, that's it, folks. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure to check out the show notes. As always, let's give them something to smile about, and we'll see you guys next week.